Hi, I'm Layla, and this is the story of how my sister exiled me from my own family, publicly, permanently, and without mercy. It began on December 29th, in the flickering warmth of a grand dining hall aglow with string lights and strained smiles. The Reynolds' annual year-end gathering was supposed to be a moment of laughter and legacy, a family tradition passed down like fine china and generational tension. The wine was expensive, the roast perfectly seared, and every smile in that room felt just a little too practiced. I hadn't seen them in a while. Not really. Sure, we exchanged holiday group texts, the occasional birthday card signed with too many exclamation marks. But nothing prepares you for walking into a room of people who've already decided who you are, without asking you. Brielle, my younger sister, stood at the center of it all like a swan in a glass pond. Graceful, luminous, and razor-sharp beneath the surface. She was dressed in champagne silk, hair swept into that effortless updo she probably paid someone $300 for. Her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. I felt the shift the moment I walked in. The room hiccuped in silence, subtle but sure. Even Aunt Karen blinked twice too quickly. "Everyone," Brielle chimed, her crystal glass raised. "Before we carve the roast, there's something important we need to share." I stood behind my chair, fingers grazing the back of it, like it might anchor me. "This year," she continued, voice honeyed with rehearsed sincerity, "we had to make a hard decision as a family, and though it was difficult, it was necessary." My stomach tightened. She turned toward me with a smile too bright, too clean. "Layla," she said, "we voted, and you're no longer part of this family." Silence. Not even a gasp, just silence. The glass in my hand tilted before I realized it, red wine sloshing over the rim and onto the white linen. Nobody moved. Nobody met my eyes. "You can't be serious," I managed. Brielle's smile didn't falter. "We are. For the well-being of the family. We all agreed. Did Mom?" I looked toward our mother. Her eyes were glassy, focused on her lap. "She didn't object," Brielle answered quickly. "Did Dad?" I asked, voice cracking on the last word, knowing he wasn't here to answer. Knowing he'd passed just 2 years ago and left a void Brielle seemed all too eager to fill. "He would have," she said, eyes narrowing with mock solemnity, "if he'd seen what you've done." "What I've done?" The words echoed, hollow and unreal. "What exactly do you think I've done?" I asked, my voice now steady, low. "You know what?" she snapped, the polished mask slipping just for a moment. "The stolen money, the lies, the way you embarrassed this family by getting involved with—" "I didn't steal anything," I cut in. "You know that." She leaned forward, resting her hands on the back of a chair like a judge preparing to pronounce sentence. "It's not about what I know. It's about what we believe, and we don't believe you anymore." The words sliced cleaner than any accusation. It wasn't the theft or the betrayal. It was the erasure, the cold bureaucratic finality of being voted out. And the worst part? Nobody defended me, not my mother, not my cousins, not even Uncle Theo, who once called me the heart of the family. They all sat in guilty silence, watching like spectators at a slow car crash. "I don't need your belief," I whispered. Brielle raised her glass again, signaling the end of my trial. "Then you won't need our family either." That was my cue to leave. I turned, walking past the table, past the people I once called blood. No one reached out. No one called my name. I stepped out into the snow. It was falling harder now, blanketing the world in silence. For a long minute, I stood on the porch, staring into the darkness, letting the cold bite deep enough to remind me I was still real. The cold didn't end when I left the party. It followed me, settled into my bones, coated my thoughts. It wasn't just the night air that bit. It was the hollow certainty that something irreversible had just happened. I didn't go home that night. I couldn't. That house, paid for by the family trust, was no longer mine. My keycard was likely already deactivated. My name scrubbed from the family group texts. That's how swift Brielle operated, like a guillotine. Instead, I ended up in a motel near the interstate, one of those places with flickering neon signs and front desk clerks who don't ask questions. I stared at the ceiling until dawn, the silence so absolute it made my own thoughts feel loud. The next morning, I checked my bank account. It was frozen. Every credit line under the family name, locked. Even my personal account, which I thought was safe, had a pending legal freeze due to internal investigation of fiduciary breach. Brielle had planned everything. That was the real twist. Not the betrayal. The orchestration. I remember sitting on the edge of that motel bed, phone in hand, staring at the blank call log. I had no one to call. Friends. They were all through Brielle. Former coworkers. Most of them had been subtly distanced over the last year. And family? Family just voted me out like I was a virus. But the worst part wasn't the logistics. It was how easy it was for them. How no one hesitated. Not even Mom. I ended up crashing on an air mattress in a friend of a friend's guest room. Technically an art studio, with oil paint fumes and barely enough space to stretch. It was humiliating. But it was real. For the first time in years, I wasn't curated. 2 days later, I got the email. Subject line, "You deserve to know." No name, no sign-off, just an attachment. It was a PDF scan of a financial agreement, bearing my signature, except I never signed it. I recognized the handwriting, though. Brielle had forged my signature once before, back when we were teenagers, and she stole from Dad's emergency stash to pay for concert tickets. Back then, I covered for her. This time, she'd used it to sign over control of my half of our father's investment holdings. Just before the vote. Just before the exile. You're not supposed to exist outside of her control, I muttered to myself. That night, I opened an old, unused Gmail and started a new document. Operation Ashes. The next morning, I walked into a downtown legal aid clinic. It smelled like old paper and burnt coffee, and the receptionist looked at me like she'd seen 1,000 versions of me this week. But when I mentioned forged contracts, her eyes sharpened. They assigned me to a pro bono associate, a wiry man named Marshall Quinn, who looked like he lived on granola bars and unpaid overtime. His tie was slightly crooked, but his handshake was firm. I need to prove a signature was forged and that my financial accounts were frozen under false pretenses, I said, sliding the printout across the table. He studied it. This was done by someone with access, someone close. She's my sister. Marshall blinked, then leaned back slowly. And you think she orchestrated your removal from the family? What? Socially? Financially? Everything. She didn't just cut me out. She erased me. He nodded slowly, then tapped the paper. You've got a shot. But going up against family isn't a case. It's war. I'm not here for revenge, I said. I'm here for the truth. Marshall looked at me for a long second. Same thing, sometimes. That night, I lay awake on the air mattress, the room dark except for the moonlight leaking through slatted blinds. I thought about the things I'd given up for that family, my career in design to help Brielle with her launch, my relationship with someone who wasn't family appropriate, my voice. There was a sound then, a voice message ping on my phone, a number I didn't recognize. Layla, I don't know if this will get to you. I probably shouldn't be calling. But what Brielle did wasn't right. And you should know. There's more. About the trust. About the vote. She threatened Mom. Call me back if you can. Don't let her win. I played it twice before saving it. It was Aunt Celeste, the only family member who'd ever taught me to stand tall. A crack. A hairline fracture in Brielle's perfect empire. I didn't sleep the night I heard Celeste's voice. I replayed her message over and over, each time parsing out new notes. Fear, guilt, urgency. It wasn't just a whisper in the dark. It was confirmation. The vote, the exile, the signature. It was all orchestrated. And Mom's silence wasn't passive, it was coerced. Morning came gray and slow, a wintry haze casting the sky in dull silver. I sat on a sagging couch in the art studio turned guest room, fingers wrapped around a chipped mug of black coffee. My phone buzzed beside me. A new email. Subject: She wasn't always golden. No body, just attachments, screenshots from an internal university system, disciplinary records, redacted names. I opened them, heart pounding. Brielle had been expelled 12 years ago from a prestigious East Coast university. The reason: academic dishonesty, plagiarism, and unauthorized access to another student's account. Expelled in her junior year. Not a sabbatical, not a transfer. Expelled. My stomach sank. We'd all believed she'd finished school abroad. She'd returned home with flair, talking about international internships and private research projects. And somehow, the story held. Because when you package a lie in silk and teeth-whitened smiles, people don't ask questions. Marshall looked at the files later that day, hunched over his laptop in the law clinic. "We can use this," he said. "She's built her image on being the perfect daughter, the responsible one. If we prove that her entire adult persona is based on deception, we destabilize her credibility." I nodded. "Let's take it further." He looked up. "You're thinking exposure?" "I'm thinking leverage." The next step was to track down someone who knew what really happened at university. The redacted file listed a faculty advisor, last name Dalton, and a few case notes about internal hearings. I posted a classified query on a niche academic board under a pseudonym, asking if anyone had known a student by Brielle's name during that time. It was a long shot. 2 days later, a reply. "I remember her. I was the TA whose work she plagiarized. Her name was Elise. She lived 2 states over, and she wasn't afraid to talk. I met her in a coffee shop just off the highway. She was in her 40s now, wearing thick-rimmed glasses and a threadbare NYU hoodie. We spoke for over an hour. She was charming," Elise said, stirring her tea with mechanical rhythm. "The kind who knows how to make professors feel special and classmates feel disposable. But when I caught her copying my thesis sections into her own grant proposal, I reported her." "Was it worth it?" I asked. She smiled, eyes tired. "They buried the story. Her parents pulled some strings, paid someone, but she was still expelled. I made sure of that." I slid my phone across the table. "Would you be willing to say all that? On record?" She paused, then nodded once, firmly. "She got where she is by lying. If she's still hurting people, I'll speak." We recorded her statement that afternoon, with Marshall coaching the consent language. The video wasn't meant for public release, not yet. But it was a loaded weapon, and it wasn't the only one. That night, I received another anonymous tip through my burner Gmail. "Check the grant funding for her nonprofit. It's all cooked." I spent the next 2 days knee-deep in tax filings, donation records, and public grant databases. Marshall and I laid the numbers out like puzzle pieces. They didn't add up. Funds marked as used for outreach had no trail. No receipts. No event logs. No partners. We had her on potential fraud. Again. "She's been playing God," Marshall muttered, flipping through files, "using your exile as a cover to divert attention." "She erased me," I said, "so she could build a throne from the ashes." The final blow that week came from Aunt Celeste. We met in her garden shed under the guise of a plant exchange. It was quiet, cramped with the scent of soil and rosemary. "She threatened to cut Mom off from her health care if she didn't vote," Celeste whispered. "Said she'd drain the trust account and let the house go into default." "She's that ruthless?" "She's desperate," Celeste said. "She knows if the family ever sees through her, she'll lose everything. And she knows you're the only one who ever really stood up to her." There it was. The reason I'd been erased, not because I was weak, but because I was dangerous. That night, I walked out onto the roof of the studio. The city glimmered in the distance like a lie. Bright from afar, messy up close. I could feel it now. The shift, the tremor before the collapse. This wasn't just revenge anymore. It was reclamation. And for the first time since the exile, I didn't feel like a victim. I felt like a fuse, freshly lit. There's a specific kind of quiet that settles when you realize your enemy thinks they've already won. It's not peace. It's the calm hum of overconfidence. And for the first time since I walked out of that cursed year-end party, I had something stronger than pain. Clarity. Marshall and I set up headquarters in a second-floor workspace above a coffee shop downtown. The place used to be a photography studio, still smelled faintly of old chemicals and maple scones. It wasn't glamorous, but it was ours. A whiteboard stood in the corner, already covered in red ink and timelines. The far wall was lined with folders, labeled with years and themes like Nonprofit Activity 2019-2023, Family Trust Records, and The Expulsion. "I'm telling you," Marshall muttered, flicking through a spreadsheet, "she's laundering through shell donations." "She's not just covering her tracks," I said. "She's building a paper empire, one fake enough to collapse the moment you touch it." That afternoon, I received an invitation I didn't expect. A gala flyer slipped into my inbox from Brielle's media team. She was receiving an award, Young Philanthropist of the Year, hosted by a foundation I now knew was partially funded by the very same grants she was abusing. It wasn't just galling, it was an opportunity. "I need to be there," I told Marshall. "You're planning to crash a black tie event for elites?" "I'm not crashing it," I said, tapping the screen. "I'm confronting a liar in the only language she speaks, public optics." He leaned back, rubbing his temple. "Do you want exposure or revenge?" "I want the truth to walk into that room wearing heels and a red dress." 2 nights later, I did just that. I wore crimson, the color Brielle always hated on me because it drew attention unfairly. The dress was borrowed, heels mine, lipstick a war paint. As I walked into the hotel ballroom, chandeliers blazing, glasses clinking, lies thick in the air, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Control. I spotted her across the room, mid-laugh, clinking flutes with people who only knew the curated version of her. When her eyes met mine, the glass in her hand trembled just slightly before she caught herself. "Layla," she said coolly as I approached, "you're not on the list." "No," I smiled, "but I'm always in the footnotes, aren't I?" She moved closer, voice low. "What are you doing here?" "I thought I'd see what the Empire looks like up close." She smiled through gritted teeth. "If you make a scene, it'll backfire. I'll bury you again." "I came to ask you one thing," I said. "Do you remember forging my name?" That hit. Her lips parted, but no words came out. And then she caught herself. "You're unwell," she hissed. "You need help." "Save that line for the camera," I said, and pulled a small USB from my clutch. "This has the original scanned contract. The real one, no signature. Just a page you added later." She paled, then scoffed. "No one will believe you, not without the platform." "Then it's good I brought the press," I said, nodding to a local reporter standing 10 feet away. One Marshall had tipped off anonymously. Brielle didn't speak again. She simply turned and walked away, her posture still perfect, but her steps uneven. 2 days later, the article broke. "Philanthropy or fraud? Allegations mount against rising nonprofit star." The fallout wasn't instant, but it started. Sponsors paused funding. Her social media was suddenly swarmed with questions instead of praise. She posted a rehearsed denial video, all teary eyes and misunderstandings, but the comment section wasn't buying it. Back in our workspace, Marshall cracked open a soda and grinned. She blinked. "Not enough," I said. "Not yet." That week, I filed a formal lawsuit. Fraud, forgery, financial damages, emotional distress. My case wasn't about money. It was about documentation. Court records are public. Depositions are binding. And once discovery started, she wouldn't be able to hide behind curated images. But that wasn't the twist. The twist came when Marshall found a memo buried in a folder from Brielle's nonprofit's internal server. Someone, an assistant, had mistakenly left the document in a public Dropbox. It was a strategy note. Contingency plan if Layla reemerges. Suggest mental instability. Position her as unreliable due to childhood episodes. I read it 3 times, stomach twisting. She planned to use my trauma, I whispered. She was going to weaponize it. Marshall looked gutted. We can bring this into court. It shows intent, malice. No, I said slowly. I want to use it first. I scheduled an interview, a podcast that focused on women reclaiming power after betrayal. It wasn't a pity party. It was about ownership. I told my story, carefully and truthfully. I mentioned the manipulation, the exile, the forged documents. I didn't name her. I didn't have to. But I ended with a line that spread fast. They said I was unstable. The truth is, I'm dangerous when underestimated. The episode went viral in under a week. Comments poured in, women with their own Brielles. Viewers who had been erased, discredited, silenced. The first real crack didn't come from a headline or lawsuit. It came in the form of a letter. Mailed. Not emailed. Handwritten. Cream-colored envelope. My name penned in cursive. No return address. Inside, a single-page note, unsigned. I believed her. I'm sorry. I didn't have the courage to question it. But we all saw what she was doing. We just didn't want to be next. I stared at it for a long time, my hands trembling. Not from fear, but from the slow realization that I wasn't the only one suffocating in Brielle's shadow. Someone inside the circle was waking up. Or maybe they always knew. Maybe silence was just self-preservation, disguised as loyalty. Marshall read it over my shoulder. They're starting to turn. No, I said, carefully folding the letter back into the envelope. They're starting to remember. Brielle's downfall didn't happen overnight. That would have been too neat for someone like her. No, it came in waves, like erosion. Quiet. Relentless. First, her board of trustees called an emergency meeting. One sponsor pulled funding pending further review. Then, a volunteer staffer resigned and leaked screenshots of Brielle's internal emails. Rude, manipulative, demanding. Nothing illegal, but enough to fracture her saint-like image. Her social media accounts turned into battlegrounds. Comments flooded in. Some sympathetic, most not. And then, radio silence. For 3 days, Brielle went completely dark online. I didn't trust it. The call came on the 4th day. My mother. Her voice was tight. She's here, at the house. I could picture it. Brielle pacing the old sunroom, phone pressed to one ear, wine glass in the other, spinning stories like silk. She said you're trying to destroy her, that she tried to protect you, and you're ungrateful, that you're spreading lies. I'm not, I said. I know, Mom whispered, and that broke me a little. It wasn't an apology, not yet, but it was acknowledgement. I just wanted peace, she said. I didn't know how to say no to her. You didn't have to, I said. You just had to not say yes. Later that week, I received a cease and desist letter from Brielle's lawyer. It was laughable, thinly veiled threats of defamation, demanding I retract my statements. I sent it to Marshall, who read it and chuckled dryly. This isn't a threat, he said. It's a scream. Let her scream, I said. The louder she gets, the more people notice. Still, the letter rattled me. Not because of what it said, but because of what it implied. She wasn't backing down. She was spiraling. Then came the real twist. A journalist reached out, someone from a national outlet. He'd been following the podcast episode and recent headlines. He wanted to meet. We sat in a quiet booth at a tucked-away diner. He had a voice like sandpaper and eyes that didn't blink enough. She filed a private guardianship motion, he said, sliding a folder across the table. I froze. What? Brielle filed in family court, claimed you're mentally unwell and need a legal conservator. She's trying to get control of your decisions, financial, medical. My heart stopped. I flipped through the papers. Her affidavit was thick with lies, concerns from childhood, erratic behavior, episodes. She used my father's death, the breakup with my ex, even my time in the motel, twisted into evidence of instability. She wasn't just attacking my reputation, she was trying to erase my autonomy. I need to file an injunction, I said immediately. We can, the journalist said, but I think people need to see this, what she's willing to do. That night, I sat alone in my workspace, staring at the papers spread before me. Her voice echoed in my head. Brielle, laughing softly during one of our last real conversations. You don't fight fire with water, Layla. You fight it with better fire. She meant it. This wasn't about justice. It never had been. It was control. It was erasure. It was power, hoarded like oxygen. I wasn't scared anymore. I was done playing defense. The table was set exactly the way it used to be. Mahogany polished to a mirror shine, cream linen napkins folded with precision, silverware aligned like soldiers at attention. It was the same room, the same layout, the same chandelier dripping with crystal. But the energy was different now. This time, I chose who got a seat. I'd rented the private dining room of the club my family used to frequent, our neutral ground, during major holidays, back when we pretended we liked each other better in public. A small circle of carefully selected family members sat around the table. Aunt Celeste, Uncle Theo, two cousins who'd called me after the podcast, and my mother. Brielle wasn't invited. And yet, 10 minutes after the appetizers were served, she walked in. She didn't knock. She didn't pause. She just opened the door like she still owned the air in the room. I figured I'd save you the trouble, she said, setting her clutch down on the side table. Let's not waste everyone's time pretending this dinner isn't about me. I didn't stand up. I didn't look away. You're not wrong, but this time I speak first. She smirked, but something in her posture had changed. The elegance was still there, but it clung to her like wet silk now, tight and desperate. I rose slowly and picked up a folder from beside my chair. This is a copy of the civil suit. I wanted you to hear it from me before it hits the news cycle. Brielle scoffed. You dragged family here for this? To serve some vendetta dressed up in paperwork? No, I said. I invited them so they could see the truth for themselves, because I'm done fighting shadows. I turned to the table. You've all been manipulated. Some of you voted me out based on lies. Some of you stayed quiet to keep the peace. I get it. Fear does ugly things to people, but silence doesn't make you innocent. It makes you complicit. Aunt Celeste looked down at her lap. My mother closed her eyes briefly. Brielle's voice cut through. This is pathetic. A theatrical tantrum. I met her gaze. Then let's talk facts. I held up the forged signature. This wasn't mine. I pulled out the transcript from Elise. You never graduated? And finally, I laid down the memo, the one from her assistant, detailing her guardianship plot. That one stung. Her jaw locked, a muscle twitching just beneath her cheekbone. Stop, she said. Quiet. Tense. I leaned in. No, you tried to erase me. You used my past, my pain, my silence, and now you'll face the consequence of everything you buried beneath your perfect image. My mother stood abruptly. Enough. All eyes turned. I let her do this, she said quietly. I knew. Maybe not everything, but enough. And I said nothing. Because I thought, if one daughter was stable, then we were still a whole family. But what kind of mother trades one child's truth for another's illusion? Brielle's breath hitched. You said you wanted peace, I whispered to my mother. But peace that comes from silence is just another form of control. She nodded, tears clinging to her lashes, but not falling. You're right. For a moment, no one spoke. And then Uncle Theo muttered, Jesus Christ, Brielle. That was the sound of something breaking, not dramatic, not loud, just final. Brielle didn't yell. She didn't plead. She picked up her clutch, adjusted her earrings, and walked out. The door didn't slam. It clicked shut, soft and deliberate. After she left, no one rushed to fill the silence. It wasn't awkward. It was sacred, like something heavy had been laid down, and no one wanted to touch it too soon. Eventually, I looked at them all and said, I don't want revenge. I want freedom, and I want the people around me to choose honesty over history. Aunt Celeste reached out first. She didn't say anything, just held my hand. That was enough. It was a Tuesday morning when I opened my eyes and realized the silence didn't hurt anymore. It had weight still, but not the kind that smothered. This silence felt earned, peaceful, not empty. 3 months had passed since the dinner. Brielle had gone underground, her social media scrubbed clean, her nonprofit on hiatus pending legal review. Rumor had it she moved to a smaller city to rebuild. But I didn't track her. I didn't need to. This wasn't her story anymore. I'd rented a small studio apartment downtown. Nothing fancy. White walls, big windows, and a writing desk I found on Craigslist. I painted one wall in deep navy and called it my truth corner. That's where I wrote. Not fiction, not memoir. Letters. To the women who messaged me after the podcast aired. To strangers who said, I see myself in you. To the little girl I once was, afraid to speak too loud in her own home. I wrote them because healing isn't a moment. It's a series of choices. And I chose to live loud. Marshall and I stayed in touch, mostly through shared Google Docs and sarcastic texts. He refused to bill me for most of his work, which I found out when I tried to send a payment, and he replied, This one's on me, troublemaker. I invited him over one night to celebrate the dismissal of Brielle's guardianship petition. The court had ruled in my favor without hesitation. Her evidence had fallen apart like paper in the rain. He brought wine. I made spaghetti. You ever think about how this all started? He asked as we ate cross-legged on the floor. I laughed softly. At a dinner table. No, before that. The first time she decided she could control you. That thought stuck with me. A month later, I gave my first TED-style talk at a community event. The theme was Voices Reclaimed. I stood on a carpeted stage in front of 100 strangers and told them not about my sister, but about my silence. About the cost of being obedient. About how sometimes the hardest part isn't speaking up, it's forgiving yourself for waiting so long to do it. The standing ovation didn't change me, but the 12-year-old girl in the front row who ran up afterward and said, I told my mom I want to write now too. That did. I got a call one Sunday morning from my mom. She didn't sound tearful. She sounded honest. I was wrong, she said. You don't owe me anything, but I need to say it. I let fear make decisions for me. I let Brielle manipulate me because it was easier than facing the mess. I was quiet. She continued, but I've been going to therapy. Real therapy, not the kind where you nod through appointments. I'm learning to own what I did, what I didn't do. Thank you, I said simply. We didn't promise a reunion. We didn't pretend we could go back. But we spoke again the next week, and the week after. One night, I stood in front of my bathroom mirror, studying the woman who looked back at me. Same eyes, same hair, but different bones, it felt like. Stronger ones. I wasn't trying to be unbroken. I was choosing to be whole anyway. On the 1-year anniversary of the exile vote, I wrote a letter I never sent. Dear Brielle, you once told me I was too soft, that I'd never survive without this family. You were half right. I didn't survive. I rebuilt. And I hope someday you understand the difference. Layla, I spent the next year turning that letter into a book. A hybrid memoir guide for those who've been gaslit, cast aside, or discredited by the very people meant to love them. I titled it, The Room They Voted Me Out Of. The irony? It sold best in book clubs led by women who looked like my mother. And now, here I am. Sitting at that same writing desk, windows open, fall wind rustling the curtains. My phone buzzes. A new message. Podcast inquiry. Would you be willing to guest host a series on family estrangement? I don't even hesitate. Yes, I type back. Let's give voice to what they thought we'd bury. In the end, what I learned wasn't just about betrayal. It was about rebuilding. Sometimes the people who raise you also raise your doubts, but the power lies in choosing to believe yourself again. I'm not sharing this story for pity. I'm sharing it because if someone, somewhere, feels invisible in their own family, I want them to know they're not alone. You don't need to be accepted to be whole. You don't need their permission to heal. Have you ever had to walk away from someone you thought would stand by you forever? Or found strength only after being broken? I'd love to hear your story. Let me know where you're watching from, or how this story landed for you. And hey, if this video hit your heart, subscribe to the channel for more stories that speak truth, power, and hope. Let's keep this conversation going.